welcome from my side. Yeah, obviously talking about cloud cost optimizations. This talk will be a little bit about sharing learnings, best practices, and what all of you can also do to optimize your cloud. We've had quite a rough journey at the beginning. I will talk about it a little bit later on. It was our motivation to drive the costs down. But first, let's get quickly into who we are. I'm Jan, I'm the CTO from FreeNOW. And Chris is joining me from DoIT. So we're both going to talk about it. I've a lot of experience on AWS, but obviously as we're talking about cloud cost optimization, also GCP, Azure, and all the other clouds might be important. A lot of concepts also apply to the others, and this is also why I brought Chris as an expert with me when it comes to GCP, because that's not my home turf. And as we've had also on the FreeNOW side, we've been working with DoIT as a partner. And this is something also where the connection was established between us, and I thought it might make sense. So first of all, a little bit meeting guidelines. Martin already started. The goal of this is it's not a one-to-many situation. Yes, we're going to talk a lot about a few things, but the goal is to have really a conversation. And I know that the group, because there was so much interest now, grew quite a bit. But still, we try to make as much time as we can, also for Q&A and individual questions. And this is also why we've organized it. Chris, even though as an external, joined our alphalist channel for the event, that we have another week after this event for individual questions. When there are some follow-up questions, when you take something away from here, talk to your teams about it, and then you notice, oh, there have been further questions brought up. This is what the channel is also for. So please utilize the channel for follow-up questions. When we're talking, we're really happy to receive questions in between. Just raise your hands, put them into the Q&A section of the Google Hangout. So use whatever tool is available here. And with that, I would also hand over to Chris for some starting questions for us also to understand what's your current state, what's the state of the audience, and what we should cover.
Exactly. And for that, we're actually I'm gonna move us one back just so everyone is able to follow. We're gonna use the polls feature in Google Meet already. So I'm gonna kick off the first poll. And as you see on the slide right now as well, in the bottom right corner, there's a small icon with this triangle, the rectangle and the circle. Click that and go to polls, please. There should be one poll for you right now. I see the first votes coming in. I'd ask you to answer the question, do you know your monthly cloud cost and the expected full year cloud costs? The first step to cost optimizing is knowing your cost, so that it helps us a ton to understand where you're currently starting from. And I see a bunch of yeses, some maybes. So good progress, 15 votes out of 26, 16. I'm going to give everyone a little more time to think about it. Awesome. This is our first question. Great baseline. Thank you very much. So we have 14 people that definitely know their cloud cost and their expected full year cloud cost. Only 2-3 people are maybes on their current cloud spend. Let's go. I'm going to move the slide forward as well. Who's your cloud provider? As we already heard, many of the tips are cloud specific, but the general ideas and practices are typically cloud agnostic. For us to give the best examples, we want to get, that's a tight race between AWS and GCP. We want to get a good understanding of where you're at, but it sounds like, or looks like we're very even here. 16 votes, slight lead for AWS. AWS
sounds like
pulling
it's
away.
Representing the market.
Who would have guessed? Awesome. Cool, thank you very much. So mostly AWS and GCP, no Azures, or at least no raised hands for Azure and other. Awesome. Okay, AWS is pulling away further and further. Let's continue. At this one, do you empower engineers to create new cloud resources on their own? A fundamental promise of the cloud, everyone can just spin up ad hoc new resources, no matter the cost. Is that something you do in your organization, that everyone spin up engineers ad hoc, resources ad hoc? Looks like most of you are. Lots of flexibility for engineers, it's great. Until finance gets the bill. All right. Cool. Looks like most of you are quite flexible. Some of you are more restrictive. Makes a ton of sense. Now, to double down on this, would you allow an engineer to spend 10,000 euros without any control, no matter if in the cloud or for books and trainings, etc.? Is that a procedure you do internally? Yes, thank you.
I love that one brave person.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Maybe in a state where there's no finance department yet and nobody is coming after you. Like, what is this? Can you explain it?
Are you hiring? Awesome. Cool. Thank you very much. Last but not least, as a result of all this flexibility, did you experience unexpected cost in the cloud bill at the end of the month? At least 5 of us are well in control. All right. I think at some point, even the 6 no's will be surprised by something, at least a price change, something hits you sometimes. But it looks like at least 6 of us are really well in control, really aware of what they're spending, where they're going. And 15 of us have had some surprises in their journeys.
Yeah, so
awesome.
The 6 people can leave now. We have nothing to teach you. No, just kidding. So something I've learned is in the journey when DevOps arrived as a concept, you empower engineers to deliver value quickly. But what I noticed is that this cost management processes that they didn't adjust to that pace yet. So if you think about 20 years back when you needed new hardware, you did a procurement request, they bought hardware, put it into the data center, and whatever. There was a lengthy process. And when we talk in this talk, we talk a lot about FinOps, which is basically adjusting also your financial processes and keeping the cloud and the speed within empowering everyone to deliver new values, to keep your practices also there up to standards, that you don't get surprises on a monthly invoice, that you also get a little bit of control how engineers spend money. Because everyone else says, yeah, an engineer shouldn't spend 10K without any control, besides one brave person. If they just spin up an 8x large instance, that's what they do. They spend within a month until the invoice is on your desk, they've spent 10,000 euros. And this is something which we all just need to be aware of. And that might be not on purpose, it might be just a mistake, click the wrong instance type and whatever. So after the starter, I will give you a very, very short context that you understand on what magnitude we had that problem and what are we doing, that you can refer a little bit better to what I'm talking about. Then a short introduction to FinOps, and then FinOps is talking about a concept of crawl, walk, run. And what we did is we didn't take the framework definitions, we just took our own definition and try to always split it into inform and optimize. And then we give a lot of examples and ultimately ending with a long list of best practices, which are really depending on what your business needs and what the status of your business is. So just to give you a brief overview of FreeNOW, we are completely running on AWS. We have roughly 400 microservices and 250 RDS databases, a ton of elastic caches, and a ton of storage. And when COVID came, obviously mobility was completely wiped out. So we lost 80% of our revenues at the beginning of 2021. And then basically what we knew is once we knew it's going to last a bit, we really need to optimize our costs and our baselines. This is why we have been on a very strict journey to really cut costs, because we lost 80% of our revenues from one day to another. And this is where we also took all our learnings from. And then once now the whole discussion about recession and it's harder to get financing for your startup, everyone is jumping on the topic. We already had a certain leap, and I think this is also why I might be able to share some learnings we made throughout the journey. So talking very, very quickly, just to introduce the concept of FinOps and the principles to all of you. You can read this online. If you Google for FinOps, there's a website, FinOps Frameworks, this stuff where you can dig very deep, but this shouldn't be a university class here, but I think the principles is still something which will resonate throughout the presentation. So first of all, when it comes to cloud costs and managing cloud costs, teams need to collaborate. So they need to be part of this journey. You cannot do it as a one-man show looking at the invoice, just yelling around saying, hey, this is too expensive. You need to share that burden. And everyone needs to start their ownership. And that comes with also having visibility about the cost. Because currently a lot of teams don't even know what they are spending. They build a new cool feature, not optimizing it for costs. And this is something where that really resonated with me. And then obviously if you go to the cloud, it needs to be obvious for everyone that you have a certain variability. So you can rent resources and decommission them right away again. That will always be more expensive than buying hardware on premise. If you know your steady workloads and whatever, this is something where you should really question yourself whether the cloud is the optimal cost solution for you. There are also models where this can make sense, but I think it's always important that you also utilize these things, because then only the power and the cheaper prices of the cloud will really help you. So what we did on FreeNOW, and this is also one of the learnings which has really helped us as a business, we set out an arbitrary metric. So we took a business metric, which makes us money, which is in our case rights. And whatever the customer is driven from A to B, we get a commission. So what we said is we take our AWS bill divided by the number of rights we are doing, and this is our North Star KPI for cost optimizations. And that helped us a lot along the way. And we started in the beginning of 2022 to really get used to it and get really into what are the cost drivers. And then we've done first optimizations, where we will talk about later on, where we already had a massive cost improvement. So as you can see over the time, how this is developing. And then we've been talking about informing ourselves in this walking stage. So what are further insights we can get, optimized, being even smarter in informing, still optimizing, and we are still on the progress. There's still a ton of stuff we can optimize, but we've currently more or less started to say, okay, now the return on invest isn't there anymore. If it's an engineering team needs to work for 2 weeks to save another 200 euros on the AWS bill, that doesn't make any sense. So this has been a little bit our journey, and we will now talk a little bit more on the details of this. So when you come really to the first stages, it's something you don't have any cloud cost control. Most of you already know what's your invoice, but what you should do also, not only knowing, you need to set yourself a budget. And you don't need a finance department telling you, hey, this is your budget. It's something for yourself to manage and to estimate. And for that, you can just easily use the cost explorers, get the extracts, take the last invoices you've received. And what you do with those things, and also what we did, is actually tie those costs to a business metric. So for us, it was rights. For someone else, it might be relocated people, or I don't know, there are multiple options. Whatever your business model tells you is what is the transaction where you're getting money. And that's the number you should pick and just project. And then next year, if someone from finance asks you, okay, how many AWS costs or GCP costs are we going to have next year? This is where you can then easily ask back, okay, how many rights we will do next year? And then you can project it. That number will very likely be too high because you have a baseline of infrastructure costs and this kind of stuff. But it's at least something. You get a grasp for it and you can track against it and see the development. And the last thing is start tagging your resources. Because when you start tagging your resources, you can understand and break the invoice down. Yeah, they are clustered, at least in AWS. I don't know about GCP, Chris, but in AWS, they are clustered by the service you're using, but there are multiple layers underneath it, which you need to start to break down to really identify the cost optimization levels. And in our case, we've had multiple stages. So one thing similar to what DoIT also does is being a reseller. I was always eliminating using a reseller right at the beginning, because for me, the idea was, okay, if AWS gives a certain discount and there's a man in the middle who will make money, that makes it worse for me. So I can negotiate a better discount with AWS directly. But actually, what it turned out is that a lot of those resellers, due to the big purchase volume they're having, they are even having better negotiation power over AWS and even giving us better prices. This is something you should think about, and it doesn't matter which reseller you're using. Just look for one of them, get an offer from them, maybe get yourself an offer directly from AWS, and then you can compare them. Then the big chunk we're seeing here is saving plans and reserved instances. There's a little to lose, and Chris will also share a little bit best practices in how to apply them and how to buy them. But it's a rather easy one where you can save quite a substantial amount of money. And this is also the big jump you can see here, is when we move the first chunk of our infrastructure into savings plans and reserved instances. Then if you have workloads where you don't care when they run, where you have workloads where your infrastructure is ready to lose machines at any given time, spot instances are also something which is really great to do, especially if you're running on a Kubernetes cluster. Have a mix between spot instances and on-demand instances, reserved instances. So have a wide spread, and then it might also optimize your build quite significantly. And what we had was really interesting. When someone would have asked me before we looked into this, do you utilize your capacities, your databases, your CPU loads? Is it all fine? Is it in the green area? When we really digged into this, we've literally been over capacity by 100%. So we had twice as much memory and twice as much CPU compared to what we needed, when you still say you want a maximum utilization of 30 to 40%. So this was the very easy first stages, easy quick wins. And now Chris will help us a little bit on when you go into savings plan reserved instance, how to do it.
For the GCP fellows among us, we're talking about committed use discounts. So not a commitment you do over multiple years with a vendor on your entire spend, but specifically on resources. These can either be on just spend, like saving plans, or committed spend-based committed use discounts, or they can be on specific resources. I'm going to have the following machine with RAM and CPU for the next 1 year or 3 years. And they give you additional discount, quite significant additional discount. So the moment that you know that a certain workload is going to be running for a prolonged amount of or longer time, at least a year, maybe up to 3 years, it might be a good idea to start thinking about commitments of this type. The big challenge is that many are afraid to lose the ability to make decisions, to change their workloads, etc. Right? And this is where a good strategy when purchasing these commitments come into play. What we typically recommend is diversify as much as possible on all 3 layers. This is a first starting point as a goal objective. It might be that you end up with something completely different, but take it as ideas on what levels you can diversify. The first one is when to purchase. So when you go into BCP billing accounts, for example, and you see a recommendation for committed use discounts, do not purchase everything at once. What will be the result? Even if you just do 1 year, you have a full year of not being able to make any decisions. So we recommend to do at maximum 30% of what's recommended in the first quarter. Second quarter, review, think about it, maybe do this in the next 30%. Third quarter, etc. In the fourth quarter, you either do nothing or you had some growth and you make new purchasing decisions. So spread out when to purchase, diversify there, so that you can, after four full quarters already, can adjust. Your first commitments are running out and you can either repurchase or you can change them entirely, you can stop using them, etc. Second one, diversify length. 3-year commitments give you the biggest discount. If you currently feel like your workloads are stable enough that you know what you're roughly going to need in 3 years, great. This is a good way to save a lot on your spend. But at the same time, it also binds you really to potentially a specific machine type. So roughly don't do 60%, like 2/3 of your spend should be in 3-year commitments, if your business generally and your workload generally allows having that kind of a planning horizon. 20% or another third in 1-year commitments, and 1/3 in no commitments or spend-based commitments, depending on how eager you are to have flexibility. And when it comes to types, you also want to have the ability to cycle through machine types, right? And depending on how flexible you are with your infrastructure to make these changes, so if you want to change to ARM-based machines, for example, can you do this all at once? Do you want to do it in increments, etc.? But generally, there's typically this one main standard machine types that you're using for the vast majority of your workloads. Maybe go like 2/3 with that machine type, then have the next gen machine type already slowly being rolled in, maybe with a third and another third again, put this on something very flexible like spend-based, where you can really ad hoc decide what kind of machines you need for them special use cases that you don't have on your radar yet. Good question from Florian. Would you recommend working with vendors like Zesty that manage your reserved instances on AWS for you versus doing the balancing on your own? So, we have a vested interest there. Just to make that clear, we have a product called FlexSave. You see that in the top right corner. It does basically what Zesty does, but with saving plans. Actually, it's quite a bit different than what Zesty does, because Zesty is going to have a problem with reserved instances not being able to restore those as easy in the future. Generally, yes. If you value flexibility over maxing out savings, then a solution like that can help you a ton. What you can do, you can purchase the solution, or just start using the solution depending on what kind of model you have, and they will automatically attach reserved instances or saving plans to your workloads. FlexSave, our product, for example, it's free to use as part of our reselling offering. It's going to inspect all of your running machines. If a machine runs for more than 24 hours, we immediately attach a saving plans, and you're going to have the same discount as a 1-year commitment. And you can switch it off at any moment and it's gone.
Yeah, probably the biggest thing to think of on those situations is if you already have running saving plans for 3 years, or you have a long-term planning horizon, then this is something to really assess on an individual basis. Because usually those products, and with DoIT probably it's exactly the same, they purchase 3-year instances, saving plans, or reserved instances, and you get only the 1-year discount. This is how they make the money. So you're not paying anything to them, but they obviously need to make a living and they need to have a margin. And usually with those plans, you get a 1-year discount, and they purchase for 3 years and then reusing and reselling those reserved instances or savings plans amongst all their customers. So this is something when you don't want the commitment yourself, and you want to save money, that's the easiest thing to do. And this is also what I meant with use a reseller. And a lot of these resellers also do these kind of reserved instances, FlexSave, and other optimizations for you. This is one of the first things I would really look into, because I did it way too late, because I was always thinking, yeah, they also need to make their margin and whatever, until I really understood the concept of this 3 versus 1 year. And this is how they make their money.
We have these types. I'm going to check off this question. Thanks for the question, Florian. We have these types of commitments here already in the crawl stage. The very first stage is just getting started in FinOps. And this is already highly sophisticated strategy potentially. The main message is consider early, start early, even if you do a very small commitment with a very flexible spend-based commitment. It does reduce cost already, and you will grow into using them. You will elaborate your strategy. You will grow with the usage. So much on that. So let's move on to the next stage. So crawling, you're really just getting started. You're configuring baselines, etc. Now walking, we're getting a little more sophisticated. And the first step to greater insight is tagging and labeling workloads to gain granular insights. For example, a database. What team is using that database? What service is using that database? So basically you want to come up with a tagging / labeling strategy for almost every resource that you use, and then go crazy in Terraform applying all these labels. There are tools that can automatically check all your resources and flag or warn you if there's a label not attached, etc. If you're using Kubernetes, there's either Kube Resource Report, for example. Jan has an example there. You can maybe talk about that in a second. On GCP, there's also the GKE cost allocation feature, which kind of puts namespace level information already in the raw data billing export of GCP, so you don't have to use any third-party tool. And do you want to talk about the screenshot? Not sure if it's
maybe so the screenshot. So we've been using the Cube resource report quite a lot. And this is also where I identified all these underutilized machines in the end game. You can look into teams, you can go into nodes and all that stuff. This is now just a screenshot of our teams. And there's, for example, the allocation team. They have compute resource and memory they've requested, and then you can see clearly from that team all the costs. In order to get it, you obviously need to tag all your pods with a team name. And then you can also see the slack costs, so not meaning, so the idle resources, how much you're spending too much when it really looks over the last 30 days or whatever the time period they're exactly looking into, how much money you are wasting and how much you might be able to downscale by having less pods running, by having less resource requested and that kind of stuff. So this is a very good thing as a starting point to get also the feeling when you have quite a few teams and you want to spread that that self-analysis basically.
Thank you. That's tagging and labeling. Second part is now you're creating these cost reports. Share those with the teams and leads. We heard at the beginning about FinOps. It's a collaborative effort. Everyone needs to be enabled. Everyone needs to see these data. Don't keep it for yourself. So find a way to frequently share those reports. Showcase cost-saving wins to the teams as well. And make it almost an effort internally that someone, hey, this team was just able to reduce S3 costs by X because they changed storage classes more intelligently to match the workloads and the features they actually need. Or we're going to have a mind-blowing example of SQS later, etc. Show these because there's learning from all these examples. How do you think about cost saving? What are all these tricks about the tools that you're frequently using, etc. And lastly, create alerts. This is something most native GCP and AWS native tooling can do. It can create alert on certain spend, anomaly detection, daily spend limits, etc., so that you're in the know when something goes out of bound. Like the example with the 10K a month extra large instance type accidentally spun up. You want to be aware before the bill goes to finance. So this is a walk in.
That's also obviously something that happened to me. This is where the question came from. An engineer just clicked the wrong instance class, and then at the end of the month, we only noticed that we have this 10K additionally on the invoice. And then we started to spin up this like daily spend reporting, which I'm getting every morning. And after one day, I would have seen it, and the cost would have been, let me lie, 350 euros instead of 10K, just by me not knowing and having this instant feedback on the costs, then led to the delay until then I noticed. And luckily, I found that on the first invoice. Because I need to say for myself, I'm not scanning all invoices on detail and whatever, and there's always a little bit volatility in the price. So yeah, definitely something to watch out for.
A thin form part. Now, what do you do in this stage? You will find automatically things that are big wins, low-hanging fruits, quick wins, whatever you want to call them. Like, when you see the teams and then you see the top services they're spending in, there's gonna be learning. Hey, this sounds like a lot. Is that really necessary to have that kind of S3 spend on backups? Or that much spent on logging? Can we like these things are gonna pop up and they're gonna be obvious. It's gonna be the first big wins, and these are also the ones you want to share. So there's not that super specific thing to do in this stage. We're gonna have much more specific examples in later iterations. Now, you grow out at some point out of these automatic reports, out of these vendor-provided cost explorers, etc. You want to go a level deeper, and this is when you're entering the run stage, when you want to have full control of what's going on with your cost data. And for that, you need to get raw data. Both GCP as well as AWS provide this. On the right-hand side here, we see a GCP export configuration of a billing account with the export settings. It's sending the cost data very granularly directly to a BigQuery table. You could also do a CSV export on GCP, but typically you do BigQuery. On AWS, you get the cost and usage report or curve files directly to S3 with a configuration, and also get very granular cost data for every single spend item basically that's coming through. You want to put that in some kind of a data warehousing solution. It really depends on what your stack already is. With GCP, it might be BigQuery. On AWS, it might be something like FreeNOW. You're putting it to Redshift, a Snowflake, a bunch of options. But you want to have a place where you can transform, enrich, aggregate this kind of data at there's always something to fix, something to clean up, like team data to feed in, aggregations to do per team, that kind of stuff. And then we want to create some kind of a self-service layer. Jan maybe later can talk a little bit about the database approach that they're using internally. But there's a bunch of, even Looker Studio can be a good approach to start off with. And as a fourth step, just like the cloud provider, have anomaly detection checks and actions like budgets, etc., built into your now customized solutions. Now, you can do all of this yourself, and FreeNOW actually did, and I can see a lot more of that. But there's also vendor solutions out there. And just as an example, what you can do when you go all in, I want to show a little bit of this tooling that we have. I'm going to keep it really high level, not going to overdo it. On a high level, the first thing is CloudAlytics. We have this UI where you can go bananas researching. Think of it like the Cost Explorer or the GCP billing accounts on steroids. But it's really about usability features at this level, right? So make it really easy to filter, make it really easy to group, make it really easy to select a specific time range, intervals, visualizations, that kind of stuff. The next part is attributions. Jan showed the team column, right? Team column doesn't exist in a standard Cost Explorer, but how do you have to find a way to create your own groupings, your own attributions. It can be teams, but it can also be microservices. Maybe it can be parts of infrastructure that you manage in different departments, yada, yada, yada. Flexible rules to pull together different types of costs based on different, like maybe GCP project names, maybe tag names, maybe some regex pattern in the tagging or in the naming, etc. All of that to use that to pull together cost. Then anomaly detection, both for GCP as for AWS, budgets, we're going to see in a second, and then specific product lenses. Sometimes it's not enough to just see the billing data. Again, a BigQuery example from earlier. BigQuery helps a lot to go into the individual logs of BigQuery, actually. Same with GKE and EKS. You can get way more out of the metadata of these tools than just using the billing data. And so having additional lenses or different views on this kind of data can give you significant benefits. Here's a quick
maybe to jump in there from my side. So we've built all of this by ourselves, and we have 2 full-time employees just doing merging cost reports, crawling Kubernetes data from all our providers into this, and we've built our own visualization solutions. And this is because we started also rather early, and also my reluctance to work with resellers. And I've no vested interest or anything like, oh, they give me now a better deal because I'm saying just use it. I wouldn't recommend anyone to build it yourself. There are solutions out there which are for free. Just use them, and yeah, you provide them with some data, and then an annoying salesperson might send you every 3rd week an email on, hey, let's talk about FlexSave, let's talk about reserved instances, let's talk about what we how we can optimize your cost. You can still ignore them, but most of them, they provide these cost insights and tagging, and just use it. Just use it. Don't build it yourself. One day when you're massive and you have an army of engineers and you want to squeeze the last bit out of your cost, then it might make sense. But I would really recommend don't do it yourself. It's just a waste of time. There are much better solutions out there.
Point. This is a quick screenshot of CloudAlytics. Budgets, I think, is almost the most interesting feature when you're getting started. As you want to set something what you're expecting, budgets in the cost vendor tooling is very limited. Here's an example of how we can do budgets, fixed budgets, one-time budgets, recurring budgets. But you can also get a forecast. Is that budget that I'm setting actually reasonable? What's the current status of the budget? And notify me at certain thresholds of the budget. And lastly, anomaly detection, really per service, an algorithm that understands what your common spend patterns are, and the moment it goes out of that, it will send an alert directly into your Slack channels based on it. You can react to it, you can jump into CloudAlytics, etc., go deeper. So features that can really save a ton of money. So, Jan, do you want to show a quick view of your internal tooling?
I can just give a which tab is it? Oh shit, I have too many tabs open. There we have it. So basically what we did is also what Chris described. We've loaded all the data in our data warehouse, and we're using here Meterbytes, and we tagged, as also mentioned before, we, for example, have an owner, which is a team, and we can all the way go to one of our microservices where you can see the cost. And this is now an aggregate, also an extract of the cube resource. Let's take just one random service. So if you go down here, and this is now one microservice, and it's attributing all the EC2 compute costs to that one microservice while joining all the cube resource information and the billing information, knowing which pod is running on which machine in which cluster. There was quite a lot of effort to actually aggregate all of this data to get the insights. And what you can see here is how much we've optimized, in this case, our own source code, and also reduced the number of concurrent running pods and whatever to drive down the EC2 costs from May, from having roughly 900 euros a month down to 85 euros in a month. And this was a very short period of time. The team really analyzed what are the workloads, what's in here, why do we have so many resources, and really optimizing a bit. And you can see Amazon, the SQS. So we tagged all the SQS queues with the team name, with the service name, and then it was easy to attribute. So this is just one example, and even though we have lots of data, people have been working on it for quite some time, it's a still very basic solution. And this is also the reason why I would say always take something off the shelf. And if it's not, we are a reseller who gives it for free and you don't want to get annoyed, you don't want to give your data to a third party, there's already also cloud cost analytics software out there, which you can buy and run on premise. So that's also an alternative solution. So the main takeaway should be start with the easy things you can do in the Cost Explorer. Once it's getting more sophisticated, hand it over to professional.
Is that service still running?
Yeah, it's still running.
That much saving? Okay.
Yeah, it's still running. It's still performing really good.
Nice.
That's
Awesome.
yeah, we optimized that a lot.
Cool, thank you for sharing. Now we're in the run optimize phase, and here it gets super granular. I'm sure what Jan's team did to reduce the cost of that taxi order service was very much code level changes to just make it run a lot more efficient. But there's sometimes also other things. Jan has this example, and Jan, since he just talked so much, I'm going to talk about it. The SQS client library has a standard polling algorithm, which is fairly high. Most workloads need a lot less. But until you figure that out, that you can actually pay for a lot less polling, takes a while. So quick tip, if you're using SQS today and you haven't adjusted your polling algorithms and your client libraries, take a look at that next week. It can save you a ton of money.
Yeah, we've cut SQS costs in our total infrastructure by 80%, because the standard polling timing is, I think, 10 or 100 milliseconds. And if we send out invoices to customers, for example, that's enough when we do that every minute. So we've been doing that via SQS, and we had, I think, 10 pods running, each polling every 10 milliseconds instead of every minute, and you pay per poll on SQS. So this is really something which is also on one of the wins, because one engineer figured that out and shared it to the wider audience, and then everyone started on, oh, let me check our configuration, and this is how we really dropped down the SQS cost massively.
After you've done code optimizations, or you've looked into code optimization, another big pillar often is network cost. And that can be obvious stuff where you just didn't think clearly about how a service actually needs to connect to other services in the beginning. And then you end up with a ton of cross availability zone or zone traffic or cross region traffic, which costs you money. But it can also be something where services are surprisingly expensive. For example, AWS nutting is really expensive. There's even an alternative, an Alternut, just a nut software you run on EC2 instances, but significantly more efficient and cheaper and still performant, reliable, all of that. Just with some good old open source software running on an EC2 instance, and you're going to be better off than the cloud provider. Look for alternate.
After you told me that, Chris, on I think yesterday, did you share the alternate example yesterday or the day before? I also didn't know that before, and I asked my team, and for us, we would save 6,000 euros a month if we would switch to Alternet, which they are now currently evaluating. So that was something also which I didn't know before. So
there you go.
Just to give you a magnitude on how much money you can save. Obviously, you also need a lot of traffic to have 6,000 euros net costs.
Yeah, it's true. Yeah. The next one is CDN coverage. It really can always improve your CDN coverage typically, especially if you're on GCP and you've like the standard GCP CDN. It really depends on the use case, but and how you're using it today. But it's more likely that there's a potential for optimization under with GCP. With a GCP CDN, but that obviously can take not only improve user experience, but also improve your network traffic. And then last one, a really weird special one, or two very weird and special ones. So the first one, SSL handshakes require transferring secret back and forth, and that's part of network traffic. If you're sending a lot of low volume traffic, like the perfect example is ad tracking or something like that, right? You're basically just requesting a pixel all the time. Then having a large certificate as part of the header is actually pretty expensive. And there are more efficient algorithms, elliptical curve digital signing algorithms, well, ECDSA, have significantly smaller certificates. Look into it. And it's, at least on AWS, it's really easy to configure. And it depends a little bit on client support, what kind of clients you have, etc. But there's also ways to detect what kind of certificates the client supports, yada yada yada. It can save a ton of network traffic as well. And obviously HTTP2, same thing, can also reduce your network costs. But now you're noticing we're really in the nitty-gritty at this point, right? And it really depends on your network patterns. And last,
this is where the whole thing becomes. It's really interesting. There are a million things, and we also have a long list of in the tips on the next slide. But those things, they might sound very insignificant and irrelevant for some of you, and others will be like, "Oh yeah, I do so many requests." Just to give you an idea of a magnitude, if I'm saving one character in the HTTP header, that's going to save me 1.5 terabytes of HTTP traffic a month. And that's just a single character. Just imagine if you take 2,000 characters and put them down to 128 characters in this certificate examples. So this is something where you really need to understand how many HTTP calls do you actually have? And is that relevant for me, or would that be premature optimization and you would save €1 at the end of the month? So really think about it. And then it comes really to your tailored workload. And this is also why we said, hey, we have this Slack channel. If you have stuff you want to pick up, you want to have further ideas, feel free to also then reach out via Slack later on.
All right. So we got through crawl, walk, run, and now we're in the section best practice, where we just put everything once again together that we have put into the individual sections. We are happy to talk through all of these, or also talk about something completely different. In the beginning of the session, we asked you to make this a conversation, and we only had one real question so far. We would love to hear from some of you how you are maybe implementing some of these approaches already, or what you're struggling with today. If it's a specific cloud provider example, give us a try. Maybe the group can give some guidance. Does anyone have something to add on any of these best practices or approaches? We have 13 minutes left. We're going to sit this out, so we can be quiet or we can talk. Okay.
I have one question. Of course, it's a bit out of the scope because we're focused on cloud costs, but like in a lot of places in our architecture, we use third-party services that are external to this cloud. So I'm just curious, how do you also consider these kind of costs, if you consider them?
Yeah, so in our case, I've shown you these AWS costs per ride, that overview. We also have, that was the first metric when we started to optimize cloud costs. Nowadays, we optimize full P&L line, IT services and maintenance cost over rides. So basically everything, every third-party provider, and I'm also doing that still on a Google Sheet. At the end of every month, I'm gathering all the invoices whether it's my payment providers, whether it's Mixpanel, whether it's Optimize, all the third-party tools I'm using, aggregate them, and then I'm having the similar graph, which is all IT cost overrides. And then I'm looking into, sometimes some contracts are 3-year contracts, fixed pricing, nothing you can optimize. But some are volume contracts. And then I'm poking teams who are maybe owning their tool or are the ones who are really using their tool to say, hey, this is pay per use. Can we optimize it? This is currently making X% of our total IT cost overrides. So this is one example how I'm then taking that into account. But that's a more manual process. Let's frame it that way. But that sheet, also for your knowledge, is completely accessible for everyone. So everyone in my team knows that sheet. Everyone knows the details. Everyone can find it, can read it. So this is the transparency is key there.
I think an important distinction, Jan, that you also mentioned is like, what's the pay-per-use? Like the basic idea of FinOps is that it's dynamic, that it's flexible, it's a continuous decision. If we're talking about a 2-year commitment or a 2-year contract, it's going to be more difficult to put in this FinOps context. It's going to be a running cost. You definitely want to monitor it, but it's less of an operational thing to keep in mind. Maxime, please.
Hey, thanks for the talk. Pretty cool. Want to potentially add a thing or two to optimize network cost thing. One big cost saver could be using AWS VPC endpoints for S3, Kinesis, whatever other AWS services you use. At some point, we figured that if you talk to an AWS service from a private network, you're essentially talking to the internet, because every S3 endpoint and whatnot resolves to an external IP address, and you're talking to an AWS service, but it's an external traffic. So it goes through your NAT gateway and you pay for that too. And if you create a VPC endpoint, it's like that NAT gateway, but it's cheaper. So you can save quite some money very quickly on talking to S3, SQS, Kinesis, EC, what's their container storage called? ECR?
Yes.
No, the Docker image storage, ECR, whatever. They have like a bunch of services and they have endpoints for plenty of those. So that's one thing that allowed us to save quite a bit. And the other thing, kind of also, but still, if you use a third-party monitoring solution, all your traces, metrics, logs, whatever, this is also external traffic. And some of the third-party monitoring providers, they, what's the word there? They offer VPC peering if they also run on AWS. I guess GCP has similar solutions, so you can peer with them and start sending traffic via that rather than natting it, which is again cheaper.
Very good point. Yeah, thank you for sharing that. To translate the VPC endpoints to GCP, I think it's called Private Service Connect or Private Network Connect. It's enabled by default on VPCs. It's basically a way to always talk to GCP services on a private net. Cool. Thank you for adding that. Yeah. Let's see who's next. Dirk, you want to go?
Yes, of course. I also want to share something. The biggest parts in our cost is databases, and especially we have to use some Oracle databases with license included, and every minute they are running, and they are big, and they are multi-AC. You see the money floating through your door. So, of course, you want to have something sustainable in the production environment, but in your test and development environment, you probably want to use everything but Oracle. Like if you have the chance to use Postgres or serverless databases, this is very nice to go. And for the places where we still have Oracle to use, if it's not in use, power it off. And so for all the test environments, we have scripts in place that are shutting down the whole stacks basically at the end of the day and turning it back up in the next morning. This is also like the reason why we don't have reservation for those instances because of they're usually running less than 12 hours a day. So this is pretty much, from my understanding, the break point, and of course not running on the weekend. So this is where we, I think we saved quite some money. But overall, I'm a bit puzzled about the combination of, or the big differences between saving plans and reservations. So if you would have the chance to elevate a bit on this, that would be really great. Thank you.
Thanks for adding that, first of all. Do you mean the technical difference or the discount difference between the two?
Yeah, it's not transparent. What's the big benefit in the saving plans? Yeah, right.
So my AWS depth is like this. My GCP depth is different. So I'm going to give it a try. Jan, you can totally correct me, or everyone else who feels more knowledgeable. Saving plans generally are based on spend, and reserved instances are based on specific instances. So saving plans tend to give you more flexibility. What you're actually going to spin up, that's going to be covered by that saving. While a reserved instance is a very specific instance in a specific data center. It's a measure of flexibility. They both have their places typically. On GCP, they're all called committed use discounts. Some of them are instance-based, some of them are spend-based, similar concept.
Yeah, I think it comes with the flexibility. I think on AWS, what's quite interesting to see, you typically have this I would almost call it grandfathering of concepts. They used to have this elastic load balancer, and then they introduced the application load balancer. You can still get the old one, but the new one is literally same price, but does more. And there's something similar with the savings plans and reserved instances and whatever. So they had reserved instances and they launched savings plan later off. And you can see that also through their product lines. So for example, on RDS, so when you have a database as a service, there's no options for savings plans. So you can only work with reserved instances because that RDS team didn't do the support for the savings plans yet. So this is something which will come in the future. And when you go all the way into Elastic Cache, that's called reserved nodes, which is even from before the reserved instances, which is even less flexible. And then if you, and then the same on the search solution of AWS, where you also only have this reserved instances stuff. So savings plans, you just need to compare that. Are just two different concepts. And it's a matter of evolution also within the AWS when they obviously don't drop the support for the old one. But I've been really upset with the reserved instances in the past quite often because I purchased a certain instance and they launched new instance types which were cheaper for more CPU and more memory, and I ended up sticking with the less performant machine, which cost the same as the other one if I would have been on the reserved instance on the other machine. And this is why we mostly do savings plan on our side now and stopped really reserved instance unless we have to, like in RDS.
Matthias, let me briefly answer your question in the chat. I'm not familiar with pump.co in detail, but to me, it looks mostly like a reseller or like tooling on top of reserved instance plans. What I understand from a brief look is that they're sharing the usage of reserved instance plans with specific groups of customers. This is probably a way to get around the new ways of how AWS is limiting reselling and sharing of reserved instances. But I'm not sure. It does not look like a reseller per se for generic cloud spend to me. Hans, please.
Hey guys, a question about the budgeting. How do you forecast the expected gains of a feature to create the budget beforehand? Because that's for me one of the hardest things, because for example, you create a service for lead generation. So I mean, as you made the example with an instance which costs you 10K, maybe it's needed to support the features, but you never can know upfront exactly how much the feature will bring you back then at return of investment. Do you have any ideas, or because it would very slow down the process of development, because you would need to talk to the business for a potential forecast. Then you would need to talk to the developers. They need to give you an roughly estimate on how much it will cost. And then you need to get back together and negotiate if it's even worth to implement this feature?
Yeah, I'm a fan of hindsight. I'm a fan of let's do it and let's observe what are the additional costs. And this is also why I think if you think about this high-level metric, business value driving rights in our case, and the costs, let's not looking at every single feature. And the assumption when you project it for the next year that it's linear, a linear correlation between business value and the cost you're driving. If that is the case, your business is really fucked. That needs to be non-proportional to each other. So there should be an economy of scale in the IT cost because you have a baseline and whatever. And all the new features you are adding, they will fit into the difference between the linear scaling and your economies of scale. I think this is how I've, instead of really thinking that through all the way to the end and estimating everything, this is basically, I'm always telling our CFO, this is the worst case guess, which I'm giving you. I'm likely to spend less than this is basically if we really spend way too much, then we would end up at that number. And that should be your internal measurement also. And then you can start applying, I want to be 10% below that or 20% below that. Once you learn year over year, month over month, you can set yourself more ambitious targets. But the goal is always think about it and to get this ballpark figure. We shouldn't do it. This is art, not science.
All right. Thank you for all the questions. We're also on time, so I'm going to move the slide forward. Thank you very much for spending this hour with us. I think I at least enjoyed quite a bit. Again, I'm going to be around in the Slack channel for some time, ask your questions, and you're going to get a recording, you're going to get the slides. Maybe we have some other follow-up stuff to share, I'm sure. But yeah, thank you for spending the time with us. Have a wonderful day.